2 days before I gave birth, my husband left with his ex, telling me to figure things out on my own and leaving me completely alone. But when he came back, his mother was waiting for him, with some papers. Hello Reddit, I'm in a very complicated situation right now and would really appreciate any advice or support. My husband Jeremy, 35M, and I, 32F, have been together for 5 years, married for 2. We met at work, so I didn't know much about his past initially. Over time, we learned that we both had been in serious relationships after graduating college. My ex and I were together for 4 years, 3 during college and 1 after, but broke up due to personal differences. We had no contact and had been separated for almost 5 years by the time I met Jeremy. Jeremy, however, remained in contact with his ex, Valerie, when we started dating. She was his high school sweetheart, and they had been together since they were 16. They stayed together through college but broke up 5 years before he met me because she wanted to advance her career, which meant taking a job in Australia. Jeremy wasn't open to a long-distance relationship, so they mutually decided to part ways. Despite this, they stayed friends since they shared the same social circle. Initially, I was okay with this. But that changed when I met their group of friends for the first time, about 9 months into our relationship. We attended a New Year's Eve dinner where Valerie was present. This caught me off guard since I hadn't expected to meet her then. Up until that point, I'd only heard about her through Jeremy, and he had painted her as warm and easygoing. However, when we interacted, her attitude toward me was far from what I expected. She made several hurtful comments about me in front of everyone, disguising them as jokes. For example, she remarked that I looked very different in person compared to photos and questioned whether I was even Jeremy's type since he typically liked tall blondes, and I was neither. She also joked about being Jeremy's predecessor, and suggested she should teach me how to keep him happy. At first, I tried to brush it off, thinking she might just have a sharp sense of humor, but her behavior got worse. At one point, she raised a toast to Jeremy for finally moving on, saying that if it weren't for her decision to move to Australia, I wouldn't be there at all. That night, I told Jeremy how uncomfortable her behavior had made me. I made it clear that I didn't feel okay with their friendship anymore because she obviously hadn't moved on and had been disrespectful toward me. Jeremy agreed that her behavior was strange and said he would cut ties with her to avoid problems in our relationship. He assured me he had blocked her on all platforms, and after that, I didn't hear about her again. His friends stopped mentioning her as well, and I assumed it was because Jeremy had told them I didn't like her. Everything was fine until last week. I was 9 months pregnant, and my due date was Sunday. On Thursday, Jeremy left to go to Valerie's side because she had an emergency. He told me she had been diagnosed with stage 2 brain cancer and needed someone to be there for her. I was shocked and furious that he would even consider leaving me so close to my delivery date. He tried to justify his decision by saying the due date wasn't always accurate and I could manage on my own for a few days. He promised to return before the baby arrived and then left without finishing the conversation. I called him several times after he left, but his phone was off. Feeling desperate, I called my mother-in-law, who has always been supportive of me. As soon as I explained the situation to her, she came over immediately, even through my tears. She tried to call him as well, but of course his phone was off. She stayed with me the whole day, comforting me because I was genuinely upset and couldn't stop crying. The pregnancy hormones were also making my emotions even harder to control. We didn't hear from Jeremy until the next day. Even then, when we tried to call him, he didn't answer. Instead, he sent both of us a text saying he'd be back soon, hopefully before the baby was born. He apologized for what he had done to me and said he would accept any punishment I thought he deserved once he returned. For now, though, he insisted he had to be there for an old friend who didn't have any family in Australia. Her parents couldn't come to see her because her father was very ill, and she was counting on him to help her process her diagnosis. He felt he simply had to stay. That explanation meant nothing to me. It only made me angrier that he thought it was more important to be there for an old friend than for his pregnant wife. He considered her cancer diagnosis an emergency while ignoring the fact that I, his wife, needed him. I didn't think a cancer diagnosis was more urgent than a pregnancy. What was he supposed to do? Cure her instantly? No. He should have stayed with me. My mother-in-law thought the same thing. When I showed her his message, she asked me very directly if I wanted to leave him. Without thinking much, I said yes. She spoke with her lawyer and had divorce papers drafted for me, along with an agreement to revoke Jeremy's parental rights. She told me that if he returned before my due date, I could decide whether to file for divorce or talk things through with him. If he didn't make it back, then the decision would be obvious. She had raised Jeremy as a single mother and understood why I was so resolved. She even assured me that Jeremy would pay child support. She said she wouldn't let me go through the same thing she did, being left to raise a child alone as Jeremy's father had done to her. She promised I wouldn't face what she had and stayed by my side that whole week. Over the next few days, none of us reached out to Jeremy. On Monday I went into labor. My mother-in-law tried calling him at least to let him know I was giving birth, but even then he didn't answer. She decided there was no point in texting him. My parents had flown in the day before, so I was lucky to have them there. Even so, I deeply felt Jeremy's absence that day and made the decision that no matter what happened when he came back, I wouldn't see him the same way again. 3 hours after giving birth, I filled out the divorce papers and asked the lawyer to file them on my behalf so the process could begin as soon as possible. I could barely hold a pen, but my mother-in-law told me that if I wanted to be happy and a good mother to my daughter, I had to prioritize myself first. I couldn't do that while staying with a man who had abandoned me at such a critical time. It was clear he cared more about his obligations to Valerie than he did about me. After giving birth to our daughter, I didn't even call him. My mother-in-law, my parents, and I spent time at home together. My parents were set to leave the next day, so it would just be me and my mother-in-law after that. I told everyone about my decision to leave him because he hadn't even tried to contact me, despite promising to be back before my due date. Instead, he spent a week with Valerie. Last night, Jeremy came home very late. When I opened the door, he immediately hugged me, but I pushed him away. I told him I wanted nothing to do with him. Hearing the doorbell and noticing the door open, my mother-in-law came into the room with the divorce papers and literally threw them in his face. She told him to leave right then and there. She added that she didn't care where he went, but she wanted him out because I needed peace and rest after giving birth just a few days ago, and he hadn't even been there for that. She also told him I'd already filled out the divorce papers and needed him to sign away his parental rights to our daughter. Jeremy was in shock and couldn't say anything for the first few minutes. I decided to leave the room because my mother-in-law was right. I was still weak and needed time to recover physically. I went to another room, avoiding him because seeing him weakened my resolve, and I didn't want this to become harder for me. I soon heard shouting and realized Jeremy had started arguing with his mother. I chose not to intervene and stayed with my daughter instead. After a few minutes, Jeremy started calling my name, demanding that I talk to him and at least let him see his daughter, claiming I owed him that much. That infuriated me. I put my daughter in her crib, walked out, and told him I owed him absolutely nothing. I reminded him that he had consciously chosen not to be with me, knowing how close I was to my due date, and had decided not to be present for our child's birth. He had left me completely alone, and I was fortunate that my mother-in-law had been there for me. I told him I didn't care if he wanted to see our daughter at that moment. She was asleep and I didn't want to wake her. I insisted that he leave and said we could discuss everything later in the morning. Finally, he left, but I could see tears in his eyes as he walked away. He tried to talk to me one last time, but I turned away and told him to go. We were exhausted, so we went to bed. But this morning he showed up again. I finally told him that for me it was over. It had been over since the moment he left with Valerie, and there was nothing he could say to change my mind. My mother-in-law was in the room when I told him this, but I had asked her to let me have the conversation with him alone so we could settle things once and for all. He started crying and begging almost immediately, and my mother-in-law had to leave the house with the baby to avoid exposing our daughter to the noise as he was getting quite loud. Jeremy insisted he had only gone to Valerie because she had begged him, claiming she was on her deathbed. He said he stayed with her for a week because she had no family and was very lonely, spending those days comforting her and being there for her. He swore it was purely platonic, but honestly I wasn't there, so how could I know for sure? I told him it didn't matter anymore. I wanted him to leave. Then he argued that even if I decided to divorce him, taking away his chance to be a father was too harsh. He begged me to reconsider, warning that if I insisted, he would have no choice but to fight for custody. Despite his threats, I knew it was unlikely he'd win custody. He hadn't even been present for our daughter's birth, and that could work against him. Besides, she's a newborn and needs her mother much more than her father right now. Jeremy pleaded for one more chance, saying that above all, he just wanted a family. Eventually he left, but not before asking me to think it over. Now, I'm not sure what to do. This is a life-altering decision, and I want to be absolutely certain before I move forward. So, am I the bad one for divorcing my husband and asking him to give up his parental rights because he missed the birth of our daughter to be with his ex, who claimed to be on her deathbed? Update: when I've made my decision, I'm proceeding with the divorce. However, I'm still deciding whether or not to pursue full custody of my daughter. It's been 4 days since my original post, and Jeremy has shown up at the house every single day to apologize and literally beg for forgiveness. It's becoming harder to reject him each time, but I know I have to. Thankfully, my mother-in-law has supported me every step of the way and is helping take care of the baby. My parents had to return home 2 days after I gave birth, but she's been kind enough to move into my house long-term because she knows I'll need all the help I can get. I've assured her that even if I don't grant Jeremy partial or full custody, she'll always have the right to see her granddaughter whenever she wants. When I asked her opinion about the custody situation, she told me it was my decision to make and that she trusts I'll choose what's best for both me and the baby, just like I did with the divorce. Despite this, I'm still struggling to make a decision. It doesn't help that Jeremy keeps showing up. Every time he comes, I feel tempted to forgive him and take him back, but I know I can't, especially after everything I've been through because of Valerie. She's always been a sore subject for me, and he didn't even care enough to put me and our child first when I was pregnant. To be honest, I don't even know if he and Valerie have been in contact recently or if there was truly nothing between them these past months. I just can't trust anything he says. His apologies have all been the same. He keeps repeating what he said when he first came home after visiting Valerie, that nothing happened, that it was all platonic, and that he was only there to care for her because she claimed to be on her deathbed. I keep telling him it doesn't matter anymore because I've made my decision. It's really sad, but this is how things have to be. Update 2: a few days ago, I shared that I'd decided to proceed with the divorce but was still unsure about seeking full custody. Now, I think I've made up my mind. Jeremy showed up at the house every day for 5 days straight to apologize for his actions and try to convince me to reconcile. But then, suddenly he stopped coming. At first, I thought it was strange, but I was also relieved because I thought I'd finally have the space to think clearly. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Soon after, I started receiving messages from other people, accusing me of being cruel and immoral. These messages came from his friends, and not just his close circle but people who went to school or college with him. It was obvious he had written a template and asked them to bombard me with the same message, almost like a petition. At first, I blocked them left and right, but then they began creating fake accounts to continue messaging me. I'm dealing with postpartum exhaustion while trying to care for my newborn, and this harassment is the last thing I need. If Jeremy truly cared, he wouldn't be putting me in this position during such a delicate time in my life. It's clear he only cares about himself. This realization helped me make up my mind. I'll be seeking full custody. He still has the option to sign away his parental rights if he chooses. I've spoken to my lawyer and the process is moving forward. What upsets me most about the messages is a specific line they all included: "We never expected you to be the kind of person who would use your child as a pawn to punish your partner and play mind games." That line hit me hard. Does he seriously think I'm using our daughter to punish him? If so, he clearly doesn't understand how marriages or parenting work. If he did, he'd never have said that. It was painful to read, but it also solidified my decision. When I showed the messages to my mother-in-law, she was furious and wanted to confront him, but I asked her not to. It's not worth the effort. If we confront him, he'll just deny having anything to do with it, even though it's obvious he's behind it. Honestly, I don't understand why he involved his friends. Did he think their opinions would sway me? They're not my friends and their messages mean nothing to me. Maybe he thought overwhelming pressure would make me give in, but he clearly doesn't know me at all. I'm not the type to cave under pressure. I didn't change my mind when he came to the house every day begging for forgiveness because I know letting him back into my life wouldn't be good for me or for our daughter. I knew letting him back into my life wouldn't be good for either him or our daughter. I felt terrible about it, but I still moved forward because I'm not someone who gives in easily. After so much time together, you'd think he would have some idea of the kind of person I am, but it's clear he doesn't. And every day, I'm more certain that I'm doing the right thing by choosing to leave him. So, even if not just his friends but everyone he knows starts messaging me about this, I'm not going to change my mind. In fact, this situation he's created has only made me more confident in my decision. As long as the people I love are by my side, I know I don't need to worry about any of this. Update number 3. The legal proceedings for the divorce and custody agreement will start in a few days. Jeremy has decided not to contest the divorce but is suing for at least partial custody of our daughter. We'll see how that goes, but I don't think shared custody is something I'd want, at least not until our daughter is old enough to decide for herself. My differences with my soon-to-be ex-husband don't need to involve her, so that's what we'll be negotiating. I'm very glad I made this decision for myself. Now that it's finally happening and I see how real it all is, I thought I'd feel scared, but I've never been more sure of something in my life. Part of that might also be because of a message I got from Valerie yesterday. She said she didn't want to be a homewrecker, but needed someone by her side since her parents wouldn't be there for her. Jeremy was the only other person she could think of. She also said that over the past few years she had tried reaching out to him several times, but he always turned her down, saying I wouldn't approve. Still, she knew her oldest friend in the world would always be there for her, especially if she was sick. That's why she contacted him. She apologized for causing so much trouble in my marriage but thinks I should let Jeremy maintain his individuality instead of being so controlling. Turns out she was right about him not blocking her. They'd actually been in contact, maybe not in the way I suspected, but they were still talking. The worst part? She told me they'd shared a moment and ended up kissing for a couple of minutes. But then Jeremy pulled away, saying he couldn't do this, especially while his wife and daughter were at home. She said the kiss didn't last more than a few minutes, and she framed it as proof of how loyal he was to me, as if that should mean something. It was ridiculous. But yes, she was right about everything else. So now, getting the divorce and custody on my terms should be a piece of cake. Knowing all of this, I've spoken to my lawyer and adjusted our petition to demand a bit more, because I feel like I deserve it after being so clearly deceived. Anyway, I feel very confident about what I'm doing and know things will turn out fine. I'll keep you updated. Thanks so much for following along. Update number 4. After months of legal proceedings, the divorce is finalized and I've been granted full custody of my daughter. My ex-husband can have supervised visitation, but I doubt he'll take it, since during the final hearing he said it was shared custody or nothing. That actually makes things easier for me. My ex-mother-in-law has been incredibly supportive, helping me take care of my daughter and the house. A few weeks ago she went back to her own home, and now I've started living alone with my daughter. I'm working from home for now and managing pretty well. Unless something new comes up, I won't be posting here again. Thank you for sticking around. Update number 5. It's been 3 years since my last post, well maybe a few months more, but I haven't kept track. I wasn't even sure I'd remember my password since I've switched computers, but luckily, everything is in the cloud now. Anyway, here's what's happening. While shopping at the mall with my daughter, I ran into my ex-husband for the first time in almost 4 years. He moved away after the divorce and we've had no contact. But it wasn't just seeing him that shocked me, it was who he was with, Valerie. Yes, that Valerie who was supposedly on her deathbed. Either she had a miraculous recovery or the whole thing was a lie. Call me crazy, but I'm leaning toward the latter. Thankfully he didn't see us. We left quickly because I didn't want to deal with a confrontation or explain to my daughter, who's now 4, who he was. She's old enough to understand some things. Afterward, I called my ex-mother-in-law, who has become something of a friend. She told me she hasn't been speaking with her son either, but reached out to some distant relatives. They said he's married to Valerie now, and they even have a baby together. She doesn't know why he's in town or anything else about the situation. If I learn more, I'll let you know. Update number 6, June 30th, 2024. Now I know why my ex is in town, and it's not good. As some of you predicted, he wants to see our daughter and introduce her to her new baby brother. I found this out because he went to my ex-mother-in-law's house first to ask her to convince me to let him see our daughter and be part of her life. She told him she wouldn't do that and knew I'd say the same. So he left, giving her a phone number to call if I changed my mind. He said he'd stay in town for a few more days, hoping to see her before leaving. That was a few days ago, so he must have left by now. I contacted my lawyer, and since he officially signed away his parental rights, I have no obligation to him. So that's that. Unless my ex comes back, I hope this is my final update.